We're here with David MacDonald. He's an advanced certified Rolfer, and he's going to share with us the modality of Rolfing.
Yeah, and I look forward, I'm glad you're here, and really look forward to conveying as much as we possibly can and make people aware of what Rolfing is, because it is a very misunderstood subject for the most part.
Great.
So my name is David MacDonald. I am an advanced certified Rolfer, and Rolfing is one of these words that confuse people. The origin of Rolfing is from Dr. Rolf, Dr. Ida P. Rolf, who do have a photograph. Dr. Rolf, she received her PhD in 1920 at Columbia. She was a biochemist and clearly a female pioneer. She looked at the biochemistry of human connective tissue, why people aged the way they aged was really her inquiry. And from 1920, from the time she received her PhD until 1950, she traveled all over the world. She researched, she explored what people were doing with healing methods, yoga in particular, and eventually realized that we needed to look at the body as a structure in gravity. And she recognized that many people, their structure collapsed as they got older. And what could she do to alleviate that? She started off looking locally at range of motion, that people would come to her and they would recognize their wrist had restriction in the range of motion. And so she would get her hand into the connective tissue and apply pressure and stretch where tissue had become stuck together and free it up, and found that she could restore range of motion in a joint. But then she found that if she did that in the wrist, what would happen in the elbow, and if she did it in the elbow, what would happen in the shoulder. And so she found that she had to look at the entire body, the whole body as a whole structure in space, how it was holding itself, presenting itself in gravity. She was probably one of the first of modern times to recognize gravity as not only a force that is universal, that we all relate to, but potentially a source of nourishment in ways that we do not fully understand. And the implication for our health is fundamental and huge. So she had many jokes and many anecdotes about gravity. She recognized that we cannot change gravity, but we can change our relationship to it. We can choose to stand more erect if we can. And yet, many people find that they don't. And so the question was, what are the forces that influence us to age in the way that we do? And what can we do about it? That was her continued passion and her exploration. She found that the connective tissue matrix, as we would call it, all the way through the body, it's like a wetsuit that you have on, which has become twisted and tight, and you put another wetsuit on top, and so there's multiple layers and matrices through the wetsuits which have all got twisted and tight and form what we call posture, what she would call structure. And so her work she wanted to call structural integration, the integration of the human structure in the field of gravity. She couldn't trademark the name, she had to call it something, so we end up with the word Rolfing. And in a simplistic way, because her work was simple, she simply said, if the body is structured fundamentally well in the field of gravity, it will function better. In other words, it will behave better, it will perform better. So she worked with many, many different types of people, from babies to athletes to elderly people, and she found that there was always a potential that she could help restore function to a higher level, a higher implicate order, no matter who the person or who the age, although there are obviously differences in what we can accomplish depending on who we're working with, what the history is, what the age is, what the health condition is. All these are factors. And she looked at the individual variances as she would present her work, as she then taught her work. She wanted to give her work to the medical community. The logo, which was created for the Rolf Institute, and it demonstrates basically the organizational framework that is potential and also the distortion which is potential. And so this is actually a very beautiful fundamental logo because it describes what we're talking about graphically. There is an implicate order which we would say is an ideal order. Obviously an imaginary line, but it depicts how the force of gravity is organized throughout the various segments of the body and how that we distribute the weight appropriately so that we're ideally organized, as opposed to the individual on the left who has for some reason either become twisted or contorted or constricted in the field of gravity as an adaptation mechanism, perhaps genetically, perhaps an accident history, many of the different influences. Is divine architecture. This is essentially what we would recognize in many ways as sacred geometry. That, and we certainly can explore more of that, many people will have an understanding that most of the forms of matter that we recognize have within them an implicit sacred geometry. They have an organizational matrix which is a structural potential, and it determines the integrity of every almost architectural form. Every form of nature you can see that sacred geometry represented. The human being, the most common representation is Leonardo's figure where he has the arms outstretched and there's a circle around him, and every measurement has a specific formula ratio which shows us that divine architecture inherent in the human. When the human's organized correctly, the moment the human comes out of that, you're going to have an issue, you're going to have a problem, you're going to have a joint that's no longer functioning, you're going to have distortion of a sacred geometric pattern. The mathematics no longer work. When we're looking at a spine, very often we isolate and people will come and say, well, I've got a sore neck, or I've got this, or I've got a low back, which of course is very, very common in our culture, in our society. And we, again, isolate. We look at one part, we zero in, and we take an x-ray and we say, well, this is compressed, or this is, without necessarily looking at what is the relationship, what's happening all the way through the spine. So gradually just let your head go forward here, Lou. And then just gradually lean forward. As we do so, what we're looking for here is we're looking for what in Lily actually happens more than it does for many people, is that we're getting this beautiful span. Everything is arcing the way we would like to see it. Each individual muscle group is doing its job of holding everything together, allowing everything to move apart. We've got the straightness primarily all the way through, and we've also got the appropriate curvatures. Now we also feel that there's a little place here where that we could get more space in there. There's probably a little constriction in there. There's probably a little more space down here. So if we were actively working, what we would be doing is lengthening as she is coming forward. And this is a beautiful position to work with the length of the spinal musculature. If we wanted to perhaps accomplish something different, say to increase the groove, then we might work when the person's on their side. This is a beautiful position specifically to get length and to see how the spine is spanning, as we would call it. And I think in the Germans they call it spanning. I think, excuse me to my German colleagues if I got that wrong, but essentially you can see how beautiful this position is for this type of work. And again, depends on how deep we need to work. And then gradually come back up. And again, look at that, the awareness of coming back up segment by segment by segment, how the spine was designed to move. And this is the awareness. Now obviously Lily is a yoga practitioner. We're seeing more yoga awareness coming into the culture. The more yoga awareness that we see coming into the culture, the less spinal problems we're going to see presenting, because that's one of the best preventatives, is to indeed make sure that the body is doing what it was designed to do, what it was supposed to do. What I'm doing here is really a little intuitive of just freeing up some of the rhomboid, trapezius, erectors for sure, getting to where we know that there's a little tight arena in here where we're going to create more space. We want to literally create space. And again, I'm allowing the tissue to tell me. I'm not imposing on the tissue. When I start imposing on the tissue will tell me to get out. You know, it will give me a message that, oh, it was too much. That's no longer feeling that it is beneficial. So when people have heard Rolfing's painful, Rolfing can be intense. But pain is normally an indicator that something is damaging the tissue. And here what we are doing is freeing restriction, and people have lost the distinction of what sensation is damaging and what sensation is actually beneficial. So as we are doing that, we're in a sense lengthening the spine. We can also have, just to complete this segment here, as Lily keeps a focus on her feet, we can have her lengthen up through the top of the head. So she is working with me here. She's getting taller, she's getting longer, and I'm lengthening the tissue. So what will happen with this is that when she gets up from the chair, she'll probably find that she feels taller. She actually might be. She might have utilized an extra ½ an inch that was there but was simply being compressed. So we're giving it this input of gravity actually lifting the structure up, as opposed to what we think of as gravity is pulling it down. Gravity is not here to pull us down. Gravity is actually here to support us upright. If our relationship to it is appropriate, that's what will happen.
Your shoulder's hurting, they want massage.
Exactly, and we're looking at lifestyle, we're looking at, as you said it, we have this colloquialism that we hold our stress in certain places. When we examine that at a more deeper level, what are we doing when we are holding our stress? To me, it's a little bit of a misnomer. We're definitely containing energy. We may be experiencing anxiety, we may be experiencing a stress factor that we are not quite sure how to respond to in life, and so we tighten it up, we hold our breath, we are in a state of potentially anxiety, a little bit hyper vigilant about what's going on, we're not quite sure how to respond, we're maybe not hydrating the way we should, we're not breathing the way we should, we're not aware or conscious of how we're being. And so there is an accumulation of energy which becomes held. And then we say, well, I'm holding my stress here. The stress is really a maladaptive response. It's a lack of awareness to how we're being in the world and what are the options. So certainly much of the work that we do with people, we are defusing these maladaptive responses, giving someone an opportunity to experience them themselves differently. When you open someone's breathing and they can finally take a deeper breath, there's what we call the colloquial sigh of relief. It's like there's a deeper felt sense of it's okay for me to be here right now without having to do anything, and there's nothing in my environment that I need to respond to and adapt to and be on alert with. And if anything, America is what I call the adrenaline society, where we're always preparing to do, or we're doing, or preparing for the next thing to do, and it's a doing much more than a being society. When you look at some of the cultures, different parts of the world, particularly native cultures, there's a lot of being. You know, they're being around the fire, they're being with the family, they're being with the community, they're enjoying being life, and they're not doing anything. Here, we look at that and it's frowned upon because we think these people are lazy and because they're not doing anything. These people look at us, they think we're crazy because we're always doing something and we don't seem to be getting anything done, and we're stressed out as we're doing it. So we're looking now at maybe a bigger picture, which Ida Rolf had her roots in. You know, what is the potential of the individual when we are being differently? How will that person interact with the world around them?
Can you talk to me about these technology devices that people are holding and they're hunched over looking at a little screen for hours typing?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Again, it's awareness. It's not what we do, it's how much awareness we bring to what we're doing. If the person who's on the computer is ergonomically correct, if they found a position to sit in appropriately and they've got their desk organized, etc., and they're holding their shoulder girdle in a particular way, and they take a break every 15 minutes or 20 minutes or so on and so forth, where they're aware of what they're doing, it's different than the person who isn't, who is sitting there building stress into their system because there's a holding pattern that is not being released every so often. They're not breathing as they're doing it. So there is the commonality, as you've probably pointed out here, that most of our distress comes because our flexor group, the muscles on the front of the body, are shortening up. Most of the things that we do that we've talked about as being maladaptive or negative responses are concerned with flexion groups of muscles in the body. The first reflex that we see in the womb in a fetus, when there's any type of distress in the mother's environment, if there's a loud noise in the mother's environment, it's called the Babinski reflex. The first thing the fetus does is this. It's a means by which we contract against potentially some danger in the environment. When we move into our adulthood, so to speak,